Everyone thought she married him for his money. And they were right. But what no one knew, not even her, was that by the time she tried to leave, she would uncover a secret so devastating it would bring a billion-dollar empire to its knees. The truth was hiding in plain sight, and it was about to destroy everything. Hello friends, welcome to Stories by Jason. Before we start, please do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. Also, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Everyone thought she was just a poor girl who got lucky. Claire Bennett had heard the whispers from the moment she stepped out of the black town car and onto the marble steps of Harlow Estate. The housekeeper's eyes swept over her second-hand coat with undisguised judgment. A junior assistant in a sharp blazer looked her up and down, then looked away, as though she were something unpleasant tracked in from the street. And somewhere behind a tall window on the second floor, a curtain shifted, someone watching her arrival with quiet, unreadable interest. She was 26 years old. She had $43 in her bank account, an eviction notice tucked inside her coat pocket, and a mother in a hospital bed whose medical bills had grown so monstrous that Claire had stopped opening the envelopes entirely. She had a degree she couldn't use, a job she just lost, and a pride that had once been iron strong and was now, after 3 years of relentless hardship, finally, catastrophically crumbling. So when the lawyer had called 8 days ago and made her an offer so surreal she'd laughed out loud, she had listened. Then she had stopped laughing. Then she had said yes. The arrangement was simple. The lawyer had explained in the flat, bloodless tone of a man who had delivered similar proposals many times before. Nathan Harlow, CEO of Harlow Industries, a man worth somewhere north of $4 billion, required a wife. Not for love, not for companionship, for appearances, for inheritance law, for a board of directors who had grown increasingly concerned about their unmarried, reclusive, emotionally unavailable chairman's fitness to lead the company long-term. The marriage needed to look real. It needed to last 1 year minimum. In exchange, Claire would receive a monthly allowance, full access to the estate's resources, and at the end of the contract, $500,000. She was not the first candidate. She had been told this plainly. Several others had declined when they'd met Nathan Harlow in person. The lawyer had said this without elaboration, which Claire found more unsettling than any explanation might have been. She met Nathan the evening before the private ceremony, in a room that was almost offensively beautiful, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace tall enough to stand in, amber light spilling across Persian rugs. He was standing with his back to her when she entered, staring into the fire, hands clasped behind him like a general surveying a battlefield he'd already lost. When he turned, she understood why the others had declined. It wasn't that he was frightening exactly. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of severe angular features that belong to old oil paintings rather than living men. He was, objectively, striking, but his eyes, gray and utterly still, like water at the bottom of a very deep well, held something that Claire could only describe as a total and complete absence of warmth. Not cruelty, not coldness even, just emptiness. The look of a man who had closed every door inside himself and lost the keys years ago. He looked at her the way you look at furniture you've ordered and aren't sure you need. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice was low and measured, "I want to be clear about what this is." "So do I," she said. Something shifted slightly in those gray eyes, almost not quite surprise. "You'll have your own rooms," he continued. "We'll appear together at required events. You won't ask questions about my private affairs. I won't intrude on yours. At the end of 12 months, we dissolve the arrangement and you receive the agreed amount." "And my mother's medical bills?" Claire asked, because the lawyer had hinted this was negotiable and she had decided, on the drive over, that she would not be embarrassed about needing what she needed. A pause, covered in full starting Monday. She nodded. "Then we have a deal." She told herself she felt nothing when she signed the contract that night. She told herself the same thing the next afternoon, standing in the estate's private chapel in a simple ivory dress she'd been provided, while a justice of the peace read words that had once meant everything to her and now meant nothing at all. Nathan Harlow did not look at her once during the ceremony. She watched his profile and felt, for the first time, not contempt, but something closer to curiosity. What had happened to this man? What had hollowed him out so completely? She told herself it didn't matter. This was a transaction. In 12 months, she would take her money and walk away and never think about any of this again. That was the plan. The plan began unraveling at 11:47 that very first night. She couldn't sleep. The bed was too large, the silence too thick, the estate making the small, strange sounds of old, wealthy houses settling into darkness. She'd gone downstairs looking for the kitchen, taken a wrong turn in the maze of corridors, and found herself in a long hallway she hadn't been shown during the brief tour. At the end of the hallway was a door, slightly ajar, soft light bleeding through the gap. She should have turned back. She knew that later she would know it clearly. But the light was warm and the house was cold, and she was lonely in the specific, aching way that only arrives after you've made an irreversible decision, so she walked toward it. The room beyond the door was a nursery. Not abandoned, maintained. The pale yellow walls were fresh. A white crib stood in the center, made up with soft blankets. A mobile of silver stars hung above it, turning slowly in the draft from the door. A wooden rocking chair sat in the corner, and on the shelf beside it, arranged with the kind of careful love that is almost painful to witness, were small toys, small books, small shoes, all for an infant who could not have been more than a year old. Claire stood very still. There was no child at Harlow Estate. She had been told this explicitly by the lawyer. Nathan Harlow was unmarried, had no dependents, no family in residence. On the shelf, propped against a small stuffed bear, was a photograph in a silver frame. She crossed the room and picked it up before she could stop herself. A woman, young, beautiful, with dark eyes and a laughing mouth, holding a newborn infant wrapped in white. The woman was looking at the camera with an expression so luminous and complete, such absolute, unguarded joy, that Claire felt the breath move out of her body. Handwritten on the back of the frame, in small, precise letters: Billionaire and our daughter, June 14th. A sound in the corridor. Claire set the photograph down, moved quickly back to the door, and slipped out into the hallway, pressing herself against the wall, heart hammering. Nathan Harlow walked past the doorway. He didn't see her. He stepped inside the nursery, and Claire heard, in the silence that followed, something she had not expected and would not forget. She heard him sit down in the rocking chair. And then, very quietly, in a voice scraped down to almost nothing, she heard him cry. She didn't tell him what she'd seen. In the days that followed, she assembled a version of normal breakfast at separate times, dinners that lasted 12 minutes before Nathan excused himself, brief and perfectly civil exchanges that neither of them extended a second longer than required. She explored the estate's library. She video-called her mother, who was already looking better, the color returning to her cheeks now that treatment had resumed without financial interruption. She walked the grounds in the early mornings when the mist was still low on the gardens, and she told herself she wasn't thinking about the nursery or the photograph or the sound of a man crying alone in a room full of baby shoes. She was thinking about it constantly. Billionaire and our daughter. She was careful. She was subtle. She was a woman who had learned, through years of having very little power, how to watch and listen and absorb. She noticed the things the staff didn't intend to show her. The way the housekeeper, Mrs. Aldridge, would glance involuntarily toward the nursery wing when she thought no one was watching. The way Nathan's personal assistant, a tightly wound young man named Daniel, would sometimes pause at his desk with a look on his face like he'd been asked a question he didn't know how to answer. The way certain rooms on the east side of the estate remained perpetually locked, and no one offered explanations. She noticed something else too, something she hadn't expected and didn't want to. Nathan Harlow, behind the granite exterior and the absent eyes, was kind. Not warmly, demonstrably kind, not in any way that called attention to itself. But she saw it. The bonus that appeared in Mrs. Aldridge's paycheck every month, well above market rate, never mentioned. The foundation listed in the company's charitable arm. She found it in an old annual report in the library, funding medical treatment for children from low-income families, started 7 years ago, receiving donations from Nathan personally every quarter. The way he spoke to the estate's groundskeeper, an elderly man named George, with a gentleness and patience entirely at odds with the cold face he showed the rest of the world. She found herself revising her assumptions about him, then resenting herself for it. She wasn't supposed to notice these things. She wasn't supposed to care. But the name kept coming back, Millionaire. 3 weeks into the marriage, she found the first concrete thread. She'd been in the library returning a book to a high shelf when a folder slid out from behind a row of volumes and dropped to the floor, scattering papers. She gathered them quickly, old documents, correspondence, nothing that appeared sensitive, but one page landed face up, and she saw the letterhead before she could look away. Whitmore Family Legal Services. Ray, Guardianship of Minor, Case 2847. And beneath it a name. Lily Harlow, DOB, June 14th. Her hands went still. June 14th, the date on the photograph, Millionaire, and our daughter. There was a daughter, a real, living child, and a legal case involving guardianship. She replaced the folder behind the books, exactly as she'd found it, and stood in the library with her heart beating very fast, understanding that she had stumbled onto something much larger and much more painful than a corporate marriage arrangement. She needed to know the truth. She told herself it was caution, that she had a right to understand what she'd walked into. But if she was being completely honest with herself, standing in that high-ceilinged room with afternoon light cutting through the tall windows, it was more than that. She was starting to care about this broken, lonely man and his secret grief. And that, she knew with crystalline clarity, was the most dangerous thing that had happened to her yet. She found the next piece 2 days later, entirely by accident. She'd come downstairs late past midnight, the house asleep, for a glass of water, and she'd heard Nathan's voice in his study, the door not fully closed. She wasn't eavesdropping, she told herself that. She was simply pausing in a corridor. I don't care what Whitmore says. Nathan's voice, stripped of its careful composure, low and fierce. She's my daughter. Whatever Millionaire's family is claiming about my fitness, a pause, someone speaking on the other end of the call. Then we fight it, we keep fighting it. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. I will not let them take her. Silence, a long one. I know, his voice quieter now, fractured at the edges. I know she's gone, I know Millionaire is gone, but Lily is here, and I am not losing her too. The call ended. Claire heard the soft sound of a phone being set down, then silence. She stood in the dark corridor and understood, with the specific, aching clarity of someone who has also known devastating loss, exactly what she was hearing. Nathan Harlow hadn't closed himself off out of coldness or arrogance. He had closed himself off because he was drowning. His wife was dead. His daughter was being contested in a custody battle by in-laws who had decided, apparently, that a grieving and emotionally unavailable billionaire was an unfit father. And he was fighting it alone in the middle of the night, in a house he'd filled with corporate arrangements and locked rooms, and a nursery he visited to cry in secret, because grief has to go somewhere, and he had nowhere left to put it. Claire walked back upstairs. She did not sleep. When she came down to breakfast the next morning and Nathan was already at the table, already guarded, already composed behind his newspaper and his silence, she sat across from him, and before she could think better of it, said, I heard you on the phone last night. I wasn't trying to, but I heard. He went very still. I'm not going to pretend I didn't, she continued, keeping her voice steady. And I'm not going to use it against you, but I think you need help, and I think you've been refusing it for so long that you've forgotten what it looks like. The silence stretched between them. His gray eyes were unreadable. She had no idea what was passing behind them. Finally he said, You're not what I expected, Miss Bennett. Claire, she said. Another pause. Something moved very faintly in those still gray eyes. Not warmth exactly, but the first small crack in the wall. Claire, he said, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Nathan Harlow said her name like it meant something. She should have stopped there, should have kept the comfortable, careful distance of two strangers fulfilling a contract. But something had shifted in the architecture of their arrangement, and neither of them was quite able to pretend it hadn't. They started talking, cautiously at first, careful, circling conversations over evening meals that began lasting longer than 12 minutes. He told her, in fragments and pieces, about Millionaire, how they'd met at a charity event when he was 29, how she'd been an artist, passionate and fierce and completely unimpressed by his money, which had been, he said, with the ghost of something almost like a smile, the most refreshing thing that had ever happened to him. How they'd married young. How Lily had arrived and filled every quiet, empty corner of his life with a noise and warmth he hadn't known he'd needed. And then, 2 years ago, a car accident on a rain-wet highway, and Alina was gone, and the noise went with her, and the warmth, and the man Nathan Harlow had been learning to become. Her parents never approved of me, he said one night, his voice flat with old bitterness. Too cold, too unavailable, too focused on work. He paused. They weren't wrong, but I was trying to change. Alina knew that. He looked at his hands. They filed for guardianship 6 months after she died. They're telling the court I'm emotionally unfit, that Lily would be better off with them. Would she? Claire asked, not unkindly. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw the full weight of everything he was carrying, undisguised. I don't know, he admitted. I only know that she's mine, and I love her, and I don't know how to show anyone that in a way they'll believe. Claire sat with that for a long moment. Show me, she said. What? Show me Lily. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning when the light was soft and golden, Nathan drove them both to a small house 40 minutes outside the city, where Lily Harlow was currently in temporary placement with a court-approved guardian during the proceedings. A kind woman named Mrs. Foster, who opened the door and let them both in with the careful watchfulness of someone who had been following this case with a complicated heart. Lily was 18 months old. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's laughing eyes, and when Nathan crouched down in the doorway of the living room, his face doing something it had clearly been a long time doing, opening, softening, becoming something human and reachable and full, and said, very quietly, "Hey, Bug." The little girl looked up from her toys and screamed, "Daddy," with the full force of her 18-month-old lungs, and launched herself at him. Claire stood in the doorway and watched Nathan Harlow hold his daughter, his face buried in her hair, his shoulders shaking, and she felt something crack open inside her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. She was in trouble. She knew it then completely. She had done the one thing she had promised herself she would not do. She had started to love him, not the billionaire, not the contract, him, the man crying in the nursery, the man funding children's medical care anonymously, the man saying she's mine and I love her in the dark. She drove back to the estate in a silence that felt different from all their previous silences, charged, fragile, full of things unsaid. She was composing herself, assembling her walls, reminding herself of the contract and the money and the plan. She was almost succeeding. And then Nathan said, quietly, eyes on the road, "You didn't have to come today. It meant a lot." She didn't answer. She looked out the window at the passing trees. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm, a small, grounding pain. She didn't say anything, but she couldn't stop herself from thinking, I would have come anywhere. The shattering thing arrived 3 days later. She'd received a call from her mother, not unusual. They spoke daily, but her mother's voice had an odd, hesitant quality Claire didn't recognize. Like she was working up to something. Like she'd been working up to it for a long time. "Claire," her mother said, "there's something I've needed to tell you. For years, I kept finding reasons not to, and then, when you called and told me where you were, who you'd married," her voice broke. "I think you need to hear this now." What followed was 17 years of buried truth, delivered in a trembling voice over a phone call, while Claire sat on the edge of her bed in Harlow Estate, and felt the floor of her known world dissolve beneath her. Her mother, Margaret Bennett, had not always been poor. She had grown up in comfort in a family with money, with connections. She had fallen in love young, unwisely, with a man her family disapproved of. She had become pregnant. Her family had cut her off completely, surgically, without mercy. She had raised Claire alone in the wreckage of that rejection, working double shifts and swallowing her pride, and never, in 26 years, speaking about where she came from. The family's name, her mother said, barely above a whisper, was Whitmore. The room tilted. "Mom," Claire's voice was very quiet, "say that again." "Your grandfather, Claire, your grandfather was Robert Whitmore, which means," her mother was crying now, "which means Alina Harlow was your cousin, and Lily." Claire stood up, sat down again, stood up. "Lily is your family," her mother said. "And the people fighting Nathan in court, the people trying to take his daughter away, they're my family, our family. And Claire, they know who you are. I think this marriage, the offer, the contract, I don't think it was random. I think they arranged it. I think they put you there." The phone call ended. Claire sat in the silence of the beautiful room in the estate of the man she had married and loved and deceived, not intentionally, but through the architecture of someone else's scheme, and understood, with a clarity so sharp it was almost like physical pain, the full shape of the trap she was in. She had been placed here by the Whitmores. Whether the lawyer was on their payroll, whether the candidate selection had been manipulated, it didn't matter. She was here, and she was holding information that could destroy Nathan's custody case or save it, depending entirely on what she chose to do next. She thought about Lily's arms around her father's neck, his face buried in her hair. She picked up her phone. She called a lawyer she'd found herself, not the one who'd placed her here, not anyone connected to the Whitmores or Harlow Industries. She said, "I need to tell you everything I know, and then I need to know how to fix it." She told Nathan that night. All of it. She sat across from him at the long dining table where they'd been slowly, tentatively learning to talk to each other, and she laid every piece of it out in plain language: the Whitmores, her mother, Lily, what she suspected about the arranged marriage, what she'd done by calling an independent attorney. She watched his face as she spoke, and she did not look away, because she felt she owed him that much, her full, unflinching honesty, even though it cost her everything. He listened without interrupting. His expression was stone. She couldn't read it. She didn't try to. When she finished, the silence was the longest they had ever shared. Then Nathan said, "Did you know any of this when you agreed to the contract?" "No," she said. "I swear to you, no." Another silence. "Do you know what this does to our case?" he said. "If the Whitmore's involvement in placing you here comes out in court, if it looks like this marriage was a setup." "It proves they'll do anything to get Lily," Claire said, "including manipulating a contract to place someone inside your household, which is not the behavior of people who love that little girl. It's the behavior of people who want to win." He looked at her for a long time. "Or," he said very quietly, "it looks like my wife is their plant." The word hit her. Wife. In all the weeks, all the careful distance and cautious conversations and tender mornings in Mrs. Foster's living room watching Lily throw herself at her father, he had never called her that. "Then I'll step back," she said, and the words cost her more than she had. "From the case, from your life. I'll remove myself as a variable. I'll give a full statement to your legal team about how the contract was approached and everything I know about the Whitmore's involvement. And you can use it or not. But I won't be a liability to you. I won't let them use me against you and Lily." She stood up, kept her voice steady. "I'm sorry, Nathan, for all of it, for not knowing sooner, for caring too much, for all of it." She made it to the doorway before he spoke. "Claire." She stopped, didn't turn. "Sit down." She turned. His face was different, still serious, still guarded, but something was working its way through it, something she recognized because she had watched it happen gradually over weeks, the walls coming down. Slowly, painfully, like a man dismantling something he'd built in desperation a long time ago and was now, carefully, against every instinct choosing not to hide behind anymore. "I don't want you to step back," he said. "I want you to stay." "Nathan." "Not for the contract." His voice was careful, deliberate, like a man choosing every word with precision. "Not for the case. I want you to stay because Lily smiled when she looked at you that morning, and she almost never smiles at strangers. And because you came to my door and told me a truth that could have destroyed you when you had every reason to hide it. And because I haven't talked to another human being the way I talked to you since Billionaire died." He paused. "I don't know what this is. I don't know what you want it to be, but I'd like a chance to find out, without a contract." The silence between them now was different from every silence before it. Not empty, full. "Okay," she said quietly, "okay." The court hearing was 3 weeks later. Claire's independent attorney had moved quickly. The evidence of the Whitmore's manipulation, the paper trail connecting their family lawyer to the firm that had arranged the marriage contract, the documented financial transfers, the records showing that Claire had been specifically selected, and her circumstances engineered, was presented to the judge in a preliminary filing that landed like a thunderclap. The Whitmores arrived in court polished and confident, and found the ground had already shifted entirely beneath their feet. Claire testified. She sat in the stand in a simple dark blazer with her hands folded in her lap, and she told the truth, every piece of it, sparing nothing, including herself. She spoke about her mother, about the Whitmore family's decades-old abandonment of Margaret Bennett and her unborn daughter. She spoke about what she'd seen in Nathan Harlow's home, the nursery, the anonymous charity, the Sunday mornings watching a father hold his daughter like she was the last solid thing in a crumbling world. She was not a polished witness. She didn't try to be. She was simply honest, and sometimes that is the most devastating thing you can put in front of a courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and 30 years of family court experience, and she watched Claire with the particular attentiveness of someone who has heard every variety of human story and has learned, because she had to tell the real ones from the performed ones. Her ruling, delivered 6 days later, was unambiguous. Custody of Lily Harlow was awarded to her father, Nathan Harlow, in full. The Whitmores' petition was dismissed. Their legal conduct was referred to the state bar. In her written judgment, the judge noted that the evidence of the Whitmores' manipulation demonstrated not parental concern, but a pattern of control that had, as she phrased it, prioritized acquisition over the child's emotional welfare. Nathan got the call on a Wednesday afternoon. He was standing in the kitchen with Claire, just standing there, both of them making coffee, the most ordinary thing in the world, when Daniel came in with his phone extended and his face doing something that took Claire a moment to identify because she had never seen it before. He was smiling, fully, openly smiling. Nathan read the message. His face did a complicated thing, then a simple thing. He set the phone down on the counter. He looked at Claire. And then Nathan Harlow, who had not cried in front of another person since the day Eleanor died, sat down on a kitchen stool, put his face in his hands and wept, not with grief this time, with something else entirely, with the particular, overwhelming relief of a man who has been fighting alone in the dark for so long that he'd forgotten light was a possibility. Claire sat down beside him. She put her hand over his. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Lily came home on a Friday. She arrived with Mrs. Foster, who handed her over with damp eyes and a hug for both of them. Lily walked into the estate's front hallway with the wonder-struck, proprietorial confidence of an 18-month-old encountering a space she has already decided belongs to her, said big house, at the top of her lungs, and then looked at Claire with Eleanor's dark eyes and said, with complete conviction, "You're pretty." Claire laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, unplanned, rising out of somewhere she hadn't accessed in a very long time. Nathan looked at her across the hallway, over his daughter's dark head, and she saw in his gray eyes something that no longer resembled that still, empty well she'd first encountered. She saw hope, tentative, new, careful, but real. They didn't remove the contract. They simply let it expire quietly without ceremony. And then Nathan asked her if she'd like to stay. Not for Lily, though Lily had plenty to say on the subject. Not for appearances. Not for any arrangement. For herself, for them, for whatever this was. She said yes. Margaret Bennett came to the estate for Christmas that year, her first visit. She walked through the front door with the expression of a woman who has carried a secret for 17 years and has finally, exhaustingly, set it down. Nathan shook her hand and said, with a warmth that still surprised people who'd known him before, "I understand Eleanor loved you very much. I'm glad to meet you." And Margaret Bennett, who had not cried in front of strangers since the day her family cut her off, burst into tears in the front hallway of Harlow Estate. Lily thought this was hilarious. As for the Whitmores, they existed as the people who scheme and lose tend to in a smaller, quieter world than they'd occupied before. The legal referral had consequences. The family patriarch, Robert Whitmore, who had once cut off his own daughter for loving the wrong man, sent a letter to Margaret that arrived just after New Year's. Margaret read it alone in her room. She didn't share what it said. Whatever was in it, apology, justification, some half measure of reckoning, was hers to decide what to do with. She kept it for 3 days. Then she put it in a drawer. Then she came downstairs to where Claire and Nathan and Lily were building something catastrophic out of wooden blocks on the living room floor, and she sat down with them, and she picked up a block, and she started to build. Some secrets, when they finally come out, don't destroy things. Sometimes they're the very thing, the only thing, that finally lets the real building begin. Can you imagine that? Walking into a marriage as a transaction, cold, desperate, just trying to survive, and walking out having changed an entire family's life forever. Having uncovered a conspiracy, testified in court, and given a little girl back to her father. Claire didn't set out to be a hero. She set out to pay her mother's hospital bills. But the moment she had the chance to do the right thing, even when it cost her everything she thought she wanted, she did it. No hesitation, no calculation. She chose love over money, truth over safety. And that choice changed everything. Here's what I want to ask you. If you had been in Claire's position, if you discovered you were a pawn in someone else's game, that the people pulling the strings were your own blood, what would you have done? Would you have walked away and protected yourself? Or would you have sat across that table and told the truth, no matter the cost? Because I think we all want to believe we'd be Claire. And stories like this one remind us that the choice to be honest, to be brave, to be real, that choice is always available to us, even when everything is stacked against us. If this story moved you, if you felt your heart break for Nathan in that nursery, if you felt fury at the Whitmore's manipulation, if Lily's little voice saying, "Daddy," made your chest tight, then you are exactly who this channel is for. Smash that like button if you believe truth and love always win in the end. Drop a comment below, tell me. Justice served if you felt the Whitmores got what they deserved, or Team Claire if she made you believe in doing the right thing again. Subscribe and hit the bell because we drop stories like this every week. Stories about real courage, hidden secrets, shocking twists, and the kind of justice that restores your faith in people. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who's in the middle of their own hard chapter and needs to be reminded that secrets don't stay buried, love doesn't stay hidden, and the truth, however long it takes, always finds its way home. We're building something here, a community of people who believe in hope, in truth. Don't miss what's coming next. You won't want to.